Good afternoon, guys. We're getting ready to take you live to the press conference in Punta Gorda. Punta Gorda Police Chief Tom Lewis fired this morning. This move follows the fatal shooting of retired librarian Mary Knowlton during a citizens training exercise back in August 2016. Here's a live look at the press conference at Punta Gorda City Hall.
So thank you for coming today. There's been much discussion over the past 2 days about the status of Tom Lewis's employment with the city. As of 10 a.m. this morning, Tom is no longer an employee of the city of Punta Gorda. I know there are many questions about this process, and I want to provide an overview of why this decision was made and how it developed over the past several days. As I have repeatedly stated, the decision about Tom's status as police chief would depend on the findings of the internal affairs investigation, which began immediately after he was acquitted of misdemeanor charges in late June. Over the course of the past 2 months, our IA team conducted numerous interviews, and from those interviews and other investigative work, compiled a report on their findings. Overall, the report demonstrates a casual approach to citizen safety during demonstrations. The Punta Gorda Police Department has an exceptional record of safety protocols when conducting officer training. But citizen demonstrations showed an inexplicable departure from those protocols. Whenever the potential for injury is present, police departments have an obligation to aggressively pursue safety. I did not find that this is the case in our department when citizen demonstrations were concerned. What I found was a non-standardized approach that created unnecessary risk for everyone involved. Because of this information, and after careful deliberation, I did not feel I could retain Tom as our chief of police. Our first discussion of that decision occurred on Friday, August 25th, when Tom also received a copy of the report to review. We discussed the possibility of resignation, and Tom suggested a return to the department as a road lieutenant, a possibility I hadn't considered. We agreed to take the weekend to consider the options and reconvene on Monday, August 28th. At the meeting on Monday, I told Tom I could not support his return to the department as a road lieutenant because I strongly believe that with new leadership, having a previous chief in a lower position would only create confusion, conflict, and division. I fully believe Tom had the best intentions in mind and suggested this option because of his commitment to this community. But I do not believe it would be in the department's best interest, nor in the best interest of our community in the long run. Upon removal of this option and other considerations, Tom told me he did not intend to resign. He was informed that if he did not resign, termination was the only other option. He left the meeting saying he would not resign. But, and I want to make this very clear, no action was taken at this meeting. Over the past 48 hours, we have held off taking any action because I was holding out hope Tom would reconsider and we could complete a separation amicably. However, after a final conversation with Tom this morning, and having no other option, I sent him a termination notice. Pursuant to our city charter, I had also informed each council member of the pending disciplinary action. I know there has been an outpouring of support for Tom, and I have received more than 100 letters, emails, visits over the past 2 months. I believe this is a clear indication of Tom's commitment and dedication to this community, and I respect the relationships he has built and fostered there. I will also reiterate what I said in February. Tom is a fine man, and I truly wish him the best in his next endeavor. However, I cannot retain a leader based on character alone. We will begin a national search for a new police chief immediately, and Captain Jason Caccini will continue to serve as interim chief until a new candidate has been selected and installed. We have begun the review and redaction of the materials in the internal affairs investigation and will make them available to the public as soon as any material statutorily protected from disclosure has been removed. I also want to thank our IA team, led by Terry Cochran, and consisting of our lawyer Brian Kochi, retired police chief Arnold Gibbs, and Todd Everly, head of the Southwest Florida Public Service Academy, for their efforts to provide a thorough and independent review of the situation. I know this is an extremely difficult development, but this has been an extremely difficult process. Starting with the tragic loss of one of our citizens just over a year ago. With this action today, I am optimistic that we can now fully move forward and continue our healing process.
We can go ahead and take some questions if that's happening.
Could you please go over each of the 3 charges that are referenced in the letter you sent him? 2 sustained, 1 not sustained.
Sure. Do you want to know what the definitions are? Sustained. Let me just tell you what sustained means.
No, I mean
Yeah, you told us.
Yeah. So when we say that a charge was sustained, such as safety, which is one of the first ones, the investigation, there was sufficient evidence to determine that the allegation did occur, or there was sufficient evidence to determine that a violation occurred other than the original allegation. That's the definition of sustained. Okay? Not sustained, the employee's actions were lawful, proper, not sustained. That's a different one. The investigation failed to disclose sufficient evidence to support the complaint. There might have been evidence, but not sufficient evidence. That's the distinction between sustained and not sustained. There's 3 other areas that I did not find applicable. One was exonerated, where the employee's actions were lawful, proper, and consistent with department policy. I did not feel any of them met that. Unfounded, I did not feel they met that. I can go over that definition if you want. And policy review required. We already did our policy reviews.
But each of the 3 individual charges, what were they?
Well, the first one was safety. The, did you bring that? Okay.
We'll come back to that question.
Yeah. The third one I know was conduct unbecoming a police officer, and the second one was, we'll get it for you.
Go ahead. We'll take the next question. We'll come back to Michael Farmer.
Have you had conversations with Chief Tom Lewis since Monday? And what have those conversations been like?
I had one today. And again, as I said here, we one last conversation to see if he had a change of heart and if he wanted to resign. He chose no, stands by his decision, and so that was the last conversation.
Can Tom appeal the decision, and who would the appeal go to, if he can?
Oh, try that one. Hey, Rusty, what was that again?
Can Tom appeal the decision, the firing? Could he appeal it? And if he can appeal it, where would the appeal go?
Tom is an at-will employee, and so I'm not aware of any appeal procedures. The city manager makes that call.
The first conversation was Friday, correct?
Yes.
He said he might have gotten a document then. Is that true?
Yes, that is absolutely true. I gave him a copy of the, as I had to, of the internal affairs investigation. Sure, he needed to review it.
But that was not a termination. You weren't giving him a termination letter on Friday, correct?
No.
We're going to go back to Michael's question real quick. We've got the 3 charges. If you can, we can zoom in. There you go.
Sure.
You can turn it.
So the first one is personnel rules and regulations. That was more safety concerned. Safety concerns was the first one. The second one was also personnel rules and regulations, and that deals with such things as efficiency of operations and things of that nature. And the third one was the conduct unbecoming, and that was the Punta Gorda Police Department standard operating procedures. So there, we can go into more detail on that if you want. We can get you that information.
Does the termination preclude any effect on any pension or, and also are you prepared for any type of wrongful termination from his attorney, or is that something that factored into your decision, or is?
Did that factor into my decision?
Yeah.
Absolutely not.
So you don't-
Hopefully I made it clear as to the decision and why I had to make that decision. As far as pension, Tom has paid into the police retirement fund. So it'll be determined on what he's paid into already.
Right, so the termination wouldn't negate any.
Again, that's up to the police pension board, but he's paid into it.
Now, I know you mentioned that you gave him every opportunity to resign.
Yes.
Why give him so many meetings? Why give him so many chances to resign? What's the benefit to the city?
Well, I would hope that through a resignation, it would benefit the community as a whole. We could all come together. We didn't have to go to the termination route and have conflict and things of that nature. It's a human thing to do. I thought it was best for the community if he did resign, and he chose a different route.
I should also add that part of the process is that there's a meeting to provide the findings to the person involved, which was Friday, and then there's the meeting to reconvene and discuss it. It's not necessarily appropriate to take a disciplinary action if the person involved hasn't had a chance to review the findings. And so that's the cause of at least 2 of those meetings.
It's part of the internal affairs process, and you know, you're dealing with police officers, so there's a very strict process that we go through.
Have you reached out to the Knowlton family at all?
On this particular, no, I have not.
When was the last time you spoke with them or anything?
I had a conversation with Steve Knowlton, one of the sons. That must have been a few weeks ago. He called me and we talked for about a half hour.
Obviously, the city and the police department have a lot of healing to do now. What qualities are you going to be looking for in the new police chief and his ability to kind of continue this process of healing the city's been going through?
I like that question. Not that I don't like the rest of your questions either, but
Give us time.
give it time.
Be careful, Michael.
The police department paradigm is the culture, how we do business, is a very true and tried way of doing business in Punta Gorda. It has worked well. It has worked well with the community, all areas of the community. It served our community well. And it's a very business, customer-centric philosophy. So much so that we do things that a lot of other police departments don't do. And I would hope a new chief, we're going to look at someone who can bring those principles and continue those principles, enhance them, great. I mean, I don't know how many police departments every week make random calls to their customer contacts and ask them, how is the service that we provided? And we get comments on that. And if some of the comments raised questions from our customers, then the supervisors talk to the employees. We reach out to the customer and we try and resolve it. I don't know how many police departments do that, but our action, our community involvement with both the police department staff and the business and residential sector has worked well. Another character that we would like to see in the new chief to carry on what we've established here is we want to bring in someone who can continue to work with all sectors of the community. Now, what does that mean? That means not only the residential sector and the business sector, but all the various neighborhoods, whether they're in the Punta Gorda Isles or Burnt Store Isles or Seminole Lakes, Burnt Store Meadows, the historic west side, the downtown, the historic east side, different demographics, somebody who can continue to establish a close relationship with all of those sectors. And that is really important. We have done that, and we need to make sure that a new chief, again, embodies that spirit. Very important.
Has anyone in the department now expressed interest in the position? Would you be open to that, or are you looking for someone outside of Punta Gorda?
The new chief will be from the outside,
Why is that?
because the new chief needs to come from the outside.
Why do you say that?
I just said it.
Is there a reason to it?
Yes, I think they're based on what I have observed. Based on what I observed, I think that is the best course of action, to bring somebody in from the outside and to work with very dedicated staff. And we have a lot of younger officers and younger dispatchers, because it's more than just officers in the police department. We have dispatch, we have records. We've got some experienced folks as well. They do an excellent job serving our community. And I just think it's best for the overall community and the department as a whole to bring somebody in from the outside. That's just my opinion.
Back in February, when you announced, I believe it was February, when you announced the suspension, you went on at length about all the volunteer work that Chief Lewis did,
Yes.
all the meetings he held and everything
Yes.
else. And now you're even talking about a new chief would have to maintain those kinds of contacts or similar contacts with various parts of the city.
Yes.
At what point, let me ask the question this way, is it possible that because of all that PR work, frankly, training got set aside, the chief's eyes were taken off the stuff that was really important that ultimately led to the death of Mary Nolan, because he was having all these volunteer efforts and showing up at parties and meetings and what have you?
Another good question. Good question. I think the chief and the department as a whole has to continue their community involvement. You have to do that. The training that I talked about in here, our department goes through strict officer training, simunitions training. They're experienced in that. That will continue. Whether there's too much of the community involvement or not, well, I guess maybe we have to take back a look at that and see. But I don't know. I don't know if that's the real reason.
They go through the training, but under stress, the night Nolan was killed, several people ignored the training.
Under stress?
Well, that particular night, the storm was coming in, they wanted to get the demonstration
Yes,
done.
that's all yes, that's well documented. You will read about that. As I said before, the citizen demonstration incidents, we did 5 of them. You'll read in the Internal Affairs report there were 5. And you'll read about each one. And the department chose not to institute the same safety protocols as they did for their simunitions training that they've been trained in. Now, you talk about under stress. You know, I need to bring you back to an example that occurred New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, 2015, 2016, when the solid training of our officers demonstrated a very excellent result. Now, some of you may have been here, some of you may remember this, some of you may not. A young man in the Tribune Woods neighborhood on our east side went to a convenience store across the street on Cooper Street and robbed the store and also used a gun and shot. Thankfully, didn't shoot anybody. And then went into the neighborhood, and our officers responded, and he was shooting at our officers. And they did not shoot back. It was getting dark, and they chose to stand back. And then they had assistance from the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office. And again, they did not fire back. They had every right to, they did not. And we waited. And they waited overnight. They careened off the neighborhood, and they waited till it got light. When it got light, they waited until the young man came out from wherever he was, and an officer stopped him, asked him to stop, and had her gun out, and the person stopped. We all knew he had a gun. Asked him to stop. He stopped. When he stopped and started coming back, the officer put the gun back in her holster, took out a taser, tased him, and with the assistance of another officer, apprehended him alive, no shots fired, and he went to jail. Our officers were safe. He was safe. His life was spared. That doesn't always happen. That not always has happened. You've all heard about it. That's the kind of training that our officers go through. That's some excellent judgment that was used. Was there risk involved? Yes. But a young man's life was saved, and no officer got hurt. So yes, we do have some pretty solid training.
But then you've had the dog incident, you've had a 91-year-old man tased, so pay your money and take a choice. Training work.
I did not want you to leave without remembering that incident.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt real quick. I just want to let everyone know that the internal affairs report is now posted on the police department's investigation or incident page. And as soon as I get back to our office, we'll send you guys a link as well. But it is there now, and I apologize for the
It is 82 pages.
mention of that, yeah.
Are any other officers or employees of the police department subject to discipline as a result of the Knowlton event?
Yes, and that has been done.
Can you elaborate?
I certainly can. Well, really, it's only one other officer, because Lee Cole is no longer employed, Katie Heck is no longer employed, and Jeff Woodard is no longer employed. So we're talking about Tom Lewis and Chris Salzman, Lieutenant Chris Salzman. He has also been handed his disciplinary notice. And I'll just tell you what it is, because you're going to ask. It's a 2-day suspension without pay, and he will not be eligible for any merit increase. But as you read the report, I didn't feel that, and this, remember, I discussed this with the IA team. I didn't feel that what's his involvement throughout the 5 scenarios and where they developed, his involvement did not merit beyond that.
The lead report that led you to the action you've taken now?
A lot.
Name the top 3 things.
There was a pattern in the citizens demonstration incident. Remember, we did 5 of them, 5 scenarios. There was a pattern, again, as I said before, there was a pattern of not imposing the same safety protocols that we have with our simulations training. There was a trend there. And, you know, when you read about the 5 scenarios and what occurred, I mean, there's a lot to be learned from that. So there was that's one of the keys. And that can't happen. That's the major key in that report that you will review. There was no intent. We had great intention of setting up the scenarios, but it just was not handled in the manner we do a lot of other things in the police department. There were no debriefings, and they should have been. And there were no protocols in place to make sure that safety concerns were addressed. Sufficient protocols. There were protocols, but not sufficient protocols. So that's why the decision came down the way it did.
Chris Salzman suspension, has he already served it, or if not, when does that start?
No, he just got his letter.
Okay. So
Yeah, I mean, again, the internal affairs investigation is not finalized till the person, in this case me, till the person delivers to the employees involved their findings. So that was just done. So he will be taking it, I'll leave it up to the acting chief to determine, or the interim chief to determine when.
And then in terms of the link to the report, the header is online, so there is no link to the actual report.
They're checking it right now. He said he just checked it. If you refresh it, you might have to clear your cache, but he just emailed me again. He said the link is working.
Okay, thank you.
Try it
But
again.
if it's not, I will be here. If I have to print copies, stick around. I'll print copies if I need to. So
We will get you a hard copy if you need it.
we couldn't do it until it had been redacted because there is still a pending criminal case with Lee Cole, and so we had to be considerate of that. But we'll get you copies.
Yeah, keep checking if you can.
Are there other questions?
Anything else? Nothing?
Okay. Well, that's all.
Thank you.
If you want to stick around for just a second, I'll collect everyone's contact info.
Public safety reporter from the Herald Tribune, Carlos Munoz, joins me now. We just finished watching City Manager Howard Koenig's press conference on the firing of former police chief Tom Lewis. Now we have Captain James Cantini as the interim police chief. And Carlos, they're saying they're looking nationwide for a new one.
You know, I think the Punta Gorda Police Department, City of Punta Gorda, is just looking to move on from this whole incident. I mean, this has been a dark time for Punta Gorda, the city and its residents, and the staff at the Punta Gorda Police Department in the City of Punta Gorda. And this event was held for chamber members, a lot of the business people in the city, and I think that it's just time for them to move on. They want to move forward, and they want to look outside for someone new to give them a fresh start. I don't think, bringing the police chief back might have been just a good for them. I think they just wanted to start over.
It was kind of that blurred lines. Koenig was saying that Chief Lewis wanted to come back and take a lower position. He wanted to be a road lieutenant, but Koenig said he didn't think that was a good idea, that it would cause confusion and division in the police department. So that's what the discussions were about. They wanted him to resign, but he wanted to take a lower position, and it happened today again. They asked him this morning, Koenig said, for Lewis to resign again, but he still wanted to stay on, and that's why he had to be terminated.
I think there was a little bit, after the trial, I think there's been a little bit of tension in there with Koenig and Lewis. I know they talked several times, according to the city spokesperson, about this. They met as late as Monday to talk about the situation, and the city spokesperson said that this was the last resolution. They didn't want to have to terminate Chief Lewis, but it was pretty much the last resort.
And if you're just now joining us, we're talking about the press conference down in Punta Gorda about the firing of Police Chief Tom Lewis. And this all happens, of course, because of that Citizens Academy last August, where the former librarian Mary Knowlton was killed during a Citizens Academy. And you were one of the first people there that night on scene. Can you kind of take us back to that dark day?
Yeah, I mean, it was a rainy night. They had the entire police department pretty much covered in yellow tape, and I think it was just a shock for the entire community. And what followed, the funeral, seeing the family and everything. And Mary Knowlton was a retired librarian who was very involved in the community, wanted to learn more about the police department, especially after the Dallas and New Orleans shootings that year. And so she came to this, and just before they left that day, her husband had said, maybe we shouldn't go to this. And they went anyway at her request and her urging. And they came to this informational meeting held by the police department, which, would be the safest place you could possibly go. And, just a terrible accident. And I think that, obviously, I think a lot of people are having a hard time with this, but I think it's just maybe time for them to move on from it.
Tragic, tragic day. And you were telling me you got to know Mary Knowlton's family pretty well. You've talked to them a few times. How are they doing?
I think Steve Knowlton and Gary Knowlton at the beginning were very, it was difficult for them. I mean, they talked about the police department supporting them after the incident. They sat through the entire trial. And I think during the trial, they were a little bit frustrated. They just wanted to see someone take accountability for this situation. Haven't heard from them recently about what they think about all this, but hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to them and find out how they're feeling.
Now, part of the situation is now closed off with the firing of Chief Tom Lewis, but Lee Cole still hasn't had a trial date set.
I checked on that. He has case management tomorrow, and maybe after that we'll get a more definitive date as to when a trial will happen, if it happens. There's always that possibility of a plea bargain of some sort, but Lee Cole is facing 30 years in prison. He's facing a $10,000 fine. I mean, there's a lot still to go on with this case, and for the city of Punta Gorda and the police department to move forward.
We'll have more on this press conference coming up tonight at 5. Thank you so much, Carlos, for being with us here today. Now it's back to your regularly scheduled programming.
We now return to our regularly scheduled program.